The following is a production of Professor Robert Barnwell. Each episode includes insights provided by the chairman, CEOs, and CFOs of the world's most successful corporations, as well as thought leaders from premier business schools and international consultancies. If you and your team would like more information on corporate leadership and strategic management, or would like to learn more about Professor Barnwell, his research, and how he may be able to assist your company, please visit Professor Barnwell's website at robertgbarnwell.com.
Hello, and welcome to CFO Talk Radio. I'm your host, Robert Barnwell. During the last episode, we spoke with Joe Rogers, a managing director with KPMG's Corporate Finance Group, about the current state and market outlook for acquisition financing. This marked the first episode in a special four-part series featuring several senior professionals from KPMG. This is episode 13, and we'll be speaking with Steve Miller. Steve, the national leader of KPMG's Integration and Separation Services practice, has agreed to join us to talk about the challenges of merger integration. Steve, welcome to CFO Talk Radio.
Thanks, Dr. Barnwell. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk about something you enjoy doing.
You know, the subject of mergers and acquisition gets a lot of attention. In fact, I think even here on CFO Talk Radio, we've dedicated a significant percentage of our episodes to M&A transactions. But unfortunately, I believe much of the available research suggests that two-thirds, probably a minimum of two-thirds of all M&A transactions are actually value destroying. You know, in addition to overpaying for transactions, I've got to assume that improper integration has got to be one of the leading reasons for these failures. Would you care to discuss the impact of integration on properly realizing maximum value from an M&A transaction perspective?
Sure, absolutely. And what I might do is kind of front-end it with, there's actually some interesting new surveys that are starting to come out, including one that KPMG authors and will release towards the end of the month. And many of us who do deals for a living had also worked on the premise for a long time that the material share of deals, destroyed rather than created value. In fact, if anything, it was our ability to help clients do better diligence, and then valuing to integrate deals, which is what kind of, keeps us in business and provides us an opportunity to help to be more successful. What we've seen, though, in some recent studies is that the trend may be slightly changing for the better. As I mentioned, at the end of June, we're going to release the sixth version of our global study on deals, and I can share a little bit of a scoop on some interesting findings in advance. That namely for deals done in the 2007 to 2009 timeframe, we found that 31% enhanced value and 32% reduced it, with the remainder, pretty much being neutral. This compares to the prior 2 years, the 06 to 07 timeframe, in which the findings suggested that 27% enhanced value and 39% reduced it. So we're seeing an improvement. And even though we feel like a longer-term analysis is more appropriate to measure the success of a deal overall, there's a couple of other studies that have just recently come out that suggest that companies doing deals are outperforming the market by varying degrees, and they're just measuring stock value relative to their peers. One study suggested a 12-point improvement, and the other one just a bit over 3. But regardless of how you measure deal success, the storyline is that companies do seem to be getting a little bit better at creating value from acquisitions. And if you want, I can kind of share at least what we found from experience and also what our survey is going to suggest as some reasons behind that.
Yeah, that sounds terrific. Why don't we spend a few minutes doing that?
Sure, absolutely. So, in terms of why this is the case, good integration is definitely an important part of that improvement, along with some other factors, doing a better job at selecting deals, performing proper due diligence, and some other factors. One of the biggest themes we've seen is that just a large portion of the M&A process has been increasingly professionalized, really starting towards the end of the 90s, moving into the 2000s. And firms are getting increasingly better about taking a professional approach to their deals. In fact, in my own career, I started doing deals in 96, spent about 5 years kind of creating the deal and started integrating them in around the 2000 timeframe. And we really saw that professionalism start to get into the process at our clients. But of all the phases of the deal cycle, though diligence and valuation really sets the bar for the price paid, and therefore the level of performance required to achieve financial success, integration is the phase where that level of performance is either achieved or not, and thus for whether a company falls into that old metric of acquirers that destroy value versus joining the increasing number of firms who are creating it through deals. And I think some of the other points I'm sure we'll kind of get to might give an opportunity to kind of dive down into that a little bit deeper.
Well, yeah, let's explore that a little more, because I would imagine that whether a company is pursuing a specific one-off M&A transaction, or if the company is actively managing a search for a series of transactions, again, would I be wrong in assuming that many integration concerns or considerations should be addressed even in advance of identifying a particular transaction?
Actually, be absolutely spot on, Dr. Barnwell. One of the leading practices we see with successful acquirers, and one that we coach our clients really heavily towards, is starting integration diligence and risk assessment at the very beginning of an acquisition, and at minimum concurrent with the financial diligence. And some of the things we find really important to look at is really take, high-level integration considerations and move into the very front end of the earliest deal phase. For example, let's say you're deciding whether or not you want to grow organically or via doing some deals. It's really important to really do an honest self-assessment on your ability to be a successful acquirer. Have you been good at them in the past? What's the size and complexity of deals you might look at, which you can undertake with a manageable level of risk, given your current deal experience, your corporate infrastructure, all the things that are going to impact the difficulty of doing a deal, of executing an integration. Then once you decide, let's say, that some portion of your growth strategy is going to be inorganic, you can then outline some really key operating parameters to screen for when selecting your targets, in addition to the financial ones a lot of companies, focus upon. For example, let's say you want to expand an area of your business where your existing infrastructure is kind of stretched. You might want to really think about the maturity of the target's infrastructure more heavily in that scenario than a situation where you have plenty of additional capacity in your acquiring division and can just tuck that target in. That element can be factored into your scan screen criteria, just the level of maturity of the target infrastructure. If you're doing a tuck-in and you're going to get rid of all that infrastructure, it may not matter. But if you're kind of stretched and you really maybe want to do a little bit of reverse integration or maybe cherry pick some systems that you want to pull over, then the maturity of that infrastructure becomes a whole lot more important. Or let's say you get into diligence, now the next phase of the deal, and you start to see some operational risks which start to impact the valuation, or may even start to speak to the terms you want to put within the purchase and sale agreement. It's not uncommon that we may see a working capital mechanism or an escrow agreement, a rep or warranty, something which is really based in an operational risk that's been discovered, during that diligence phase. And then kind of as you move a little bit further on, we just really work extremely closely, for example, with our financial diligence teams to help identify areas where they might want to focus additional time, or with our valuation teams to better assess sort of the operational considerations around how they're valuing a deal. So I guess to kind of sum it all up, we absolutely believe that integration should start at the very front end of the M&A process, and companies who do that, in our experience, consistently are more likely to fall into that, group of companies who do successful transactions.
Well, that certainly makes sense. Now, we've spent a couple of minutes, I think we discussed infrastructure and systems. And if you would, take us through some of the many additional integration issues and the types of concerns that management needs to be prepared to address when properly integrating a new acquisition into its existing business.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the specific issues, as I'm sure you've experienced yourself, are going to be that are going to materially impact a given deal are extremely transaction specific. We, for example, maintain a database of some 4,000 integration tasks, probably about 80% of which are very common across just about any deal, about 20% of which may not matter on a particular transaction, and there's a gap that you have to develop on the deal because it's something special. And there are certain themes which appear more often than others, like migrating contracts through, say, a change of control event, retaining key employees, managing stakeholder communications, things like that. But if it's okay, I'd like to kind of focus on 4 of kind of the more strategic themes that we found drive more successful integrations.
Oh, that'd be great.
Super. The first is really having a heavy laser focus on value creation and risk mitigation, otherwise potential value destruction, and really make it the center of sort of your entire integration process and the center around which the integration rotates. There's certain housekeeping tasks like, say, merging accounting policies or developing a common, expense policy that you just got to get done and can't be overlooked. But it's the specific areas of value creation or risk avoidance, like we mentioned, that were identified during due diligence, which really need to form the basis of the overall integration strategy around which the majority of sort of the planning bandwidth needs to be allocated. In that, as the first kind of key point, we typically work very closely with clients to really take the output of diligence and drive that into a set of integration guiding principles which form the foundation of kind of the day-to-day planning activity that's going to ensue. The second major point, and we'll just cover 4 quick ones here, is securing senior leadership support and developing, communicating those guiding principles. It's really important not only to have a set of key themes to drive planning towards, but also to make sure everyone understands management is 100% behind them and the integration program itself. One of the reasons that's real important is that it's very rare in our experience for clients to place very many full-time resources on integration. For the most part, people are doing the integration in parallel with the day jobs. So you're already working a 50-hour week. Now management said, congratulations, you're going to be on the integration team. Now you can add another 20 or 30 hours to that. So you're really going to be, hammering this integration program. At least you know that it's got visibility towards the very top of the company. The efforts you're going to be putting in this program are appreciated, and everybody really cares about the success of this deal. So securing that leadership support is critical. Third point is recognizing that integration is extremely complex. It's messy. It's a major strain on resources, and it involves very fast-paced decision-making in high volumes. Communicating the importance of the program and assigning A players to lead the teams, even if it's on a part-time basis, is critically important. Having a standardized but still flexible methodology and toolkit to drive the integration process helps make better use and more efficient use of kind of that limited bandwidth. And then I guess the last point is kind of having a benevolent dictatorship approach. And what we mean by that is an approach whereby you are gathering inputs from a broad set of people upon which you're going to try to make, a good decision, but make a good decision, on a timely basis rather than trying to make a perfect decision by committee. Having that approach and really recognizing that most decisions, even if they're not perfect, you can circle back and fix them later, is extremely helpful. Otherwise, you just kind of slow down the whole process of the integration. And I guess the last quick point, it's just really to recognize the importance of the people and change management component to making a deal successful. Integration can be really technical and task-oriented, but a failure to kind of step back and really realize that the importance of guiding the individual employee through all the changes going to result can destroy value extremely quickly if not handled right. You've got to have a really well-designed communications and change management plan that listens to the concerns of the fields and builds them into a really well-thought-out and holistic communications program, which should include employees, customers, vendors, investors, and really any other, key stakeholders. But those 4 points, those are the themes we've seen over, in my case, some 100 transactions. That's the consistent themes we see on what helps a deal be more successful.
All right. Well, as we look over these 4 points, or perhaps specific integration areas or activities, which ones do you find that clients often have the most difficulty with, or perhaps they're most responsible for, quote unquote, failed transactions?
I tell you, it's out of all that stuff, it's got to be the people and change component. For the most part, just about any misstep you may have in developing or executing the technical components of an integration plan, you can usually circle back and fix it, once you recognize you might have wished you'd done it a little bit different way. But there's certain mistakes you can make in the people and change aspect, though, that it's just nearly impossible to recover from. I mean, once you alienate a critical employee or a set of employees to the point where they start looking outside, say, for another job, it can be a really difficult task to bring them back from the edge, no matter how you try to circle back and fix the communications at that point. And I tell you, as an engineer with a legal background, I'm probably the stereotype of somebody that would just focus on the technical stuff and figure that people can just learn to deal with it. But 15 years of doing this have shown me that it's the soft stuff that matters most of all. And I'll share one quick story. I was doing a deal. I'd done a deal about 2 years before for a European company that's doing a market entry transaction in the U.S. So they bought about $4 billion worth of assets from a biotech. So we helped them separate it, really build a standalone company around those assets and, got them off to a good start and, went back to our work. And so about 2 years later, they called us back and they said, hey, the division's really stable. It's running well. We want to start doing deals. Can you come help us build a good integration program? So sure, absolutely. So we put together a program, came down and started with them. So one of the first things I did is I went back to those employees I'd worked with 2 years before, a lot of detailed technical planning, and said, hey, out of everything that worked well or could have worked better on that divestiture we helped you with, what worked the best? I was kind of hoping maybe I'd hear, hey, was that really great task plan you guys did, or the way you managed all the issues and all that stuff? But the thing they shared with me was this. They said, Steve, you remember when you guys had, the CEO of the acquiring company go around all our sites and do all those town halls, and you kind of, had some stuff to eat, and they just kind of mingle and got to know us? That was the thing that mattered most to us. So after months and months of hardcore, highly technical planning to make sure those thousands of things that got done right, and they did, the thing they remembered the most is when the CEO came by and spent a little time with them, the soft stuff.
Now, that's really interesting. Let's continue to pull on that thread. I mean, I realize you've worked with a number of clients on both ends of the spectrum. Again, those that have derived considerable value from their M&A transactions, and then those who've experienced results significantly below expectations. So from an integration standpoint, are there any generalities that you've noticed that really distinguish the winners from the losers?
I tell you, and I know this is kind of a little bit of a loaded answer, but for the deals, I and my teams have been fortunate to support. We kind of take a failure is not an option approach. So, I've definitely seen deals with more complex issues than others, and issues which had the potential to tank a transaction. But we've always found a way to kind of work around those issues and deliver a winner. We do get insight, though, into some other transactions, including prior failed deals, which in some cases were the impetus of why clients, brought us in to help on their new one. The 4 points I talked about before really are where we kind of gathered all the reasons where we've seen deals struggle. We made an effort to kind of collapse those into those 4 reasons. So that kind of sums up, the big 4, the big reasons why we see what separates winners from losers. But all of that, and I can probably add kind of one more to them, it's really taking the time at the front end of an integration to set the foundation for program success. Take the time to take that deal vision, drive it down to 7 or 10 extremely clear operating goals. What has to happen operationally to make this high-level, paragraph you put in your press release for why you did this deal happen. Design an integration team structure that focuses on what's going to make a specific deal successful. For example, every deal is going to have a finance, legal, HR, and IT team. And there's going to be a big team called operations. In a given transaction, if supply chain is just one of the many issues you're dealing with, you can probably manage that within the operations team. But if on the deal you're doing this time, supply chain is the transaction, there's a lot of other stuff we got to deal with that will stick in operations, but let's break supply chain out and have it be its own team. So really taking the vision of the deal, 7 or 10 operating goals, what are the guiding principles, let's build a team around it that focuses on what's important, to make this deal successful, and then to assign the best possible athlete you can to each one of those teams, making them available if needed. Even if they can't be full-time, make them part-time. If you got to free them up from their day job, half-time, do it. But selecting those best athletes to run an integration program that's very carefully custom engineered around what's going to make that specific deal successful, that's probably the single most important point to kind of separating the winners from the losers.
Yeah, again, I think that's an interesting point because I've seen a lot of management teams. They'll form a transaction team and they'll basically take whoever happens to be available, not necessarily the members of their team that are best suited for that position. In fact, the A players are usually so busy and it's felt that they're so indispensable for their day jobs. Some management teams are reluctant to pull their A players and assign them on a temporary, M&A transaction team. So I think that before we let you go, I'd really like to take this opportunity to ask what advice you would offer to the senior executive team that may be overseeing a one-off transaction and doesn't have the benefit of a substantial track record or long-term internal resources for overseeing and managing the integration of an acquisition transaction.
Sure, and I'll tell you, though, the number of best-of-breed serial acquirers that ask for outside help on their larger, more complex deals might surprise you. That profile of the less experienced company who's pursuing kind of a one-off or a make-the-company deal is a really common profile. To the first potential, recommendation is to at least consider, some outside assistance. Whether it's KPMG, hopefully, or another qualified advisor, my first recommendation would be, if you don't have the track record behind you, it is a big and complex deal. It has the potential to materially impact, the performance of your business if you really don't, turn this into a winner. Think about getting some help, maybe at least to get that integration properly structured and kicked off, like I mentioned before. That first 2 to 4 weeks of a deal, when you're really getting those core operating goals, the guiding principles, the foundation of the integration set, that sets the whole runway for a successful transaction later on. So even if that's the only part that you get some help on, consider it. The other important point is really just reiterating what we mentioned earlier about taking a measured approach to kind of laying that foundation. Again, whether you do it internally or externally, take the time before you just start, willy-nilly integrating. Figure out what it is you're integrating towards. And I can tell you, we kind of started off with why we've seen a shift, at least the current surveys, in most deals destroying value towards an increasing number of deals creating value. And we mentioned is really that professionalism of the integration process and the deal process. And in my own experience, I can tell you, back when I first started doing integration full time in the 2000 timeframe, kind of the approach back then is you developed your integration team, you just started integrating. You really didn't step back and say, what are we going to integrate before how? And kind of moving into those first few years, the 2000s, maybe towards, 2003, 4, 5, the people who do this for a living really recognize that we've got to set that foundation. We've got to have those guiding principles. You got to know what the heck it is you're integrating towards, what that target operating model is going to be, so then you can reverse engineer all those steps to get there. So probably my single biggest recommendation for that team, that management team, would be don't just start integrating before you set back and you get your target operating model on paper, you really understand what it is you're integrating towards, then you can step back, paste that thing up on the wall, figuratively, gather all your integration teams around and say, okay, you see that picture, those operating goals, that view of the future of what we want our business to look like 12 months down the road? All right, now go reverse engineer how to get there. That's probably the single most important point, is really lay that foundation.
Well, that's great parting advice. Well, today we've been speaking with Steve Miller, the national leader of KPMG's Integration and Separation Services practice. Steve, this has been a terrific discussion, and I sincerely hope that you'll agree to join us again soon.
Absolutely. This is a lot of fun. Thanks, Dr. Barnwell.
That was Steve Miller, the national leader of KPMG's Integration and Separation Services practice, talking to us about the challenges of merger integration. Please join us for our next episode when we bring you part 3 of a 4-part series featuring several senior professionals from KPMG. During this 3rd episode, we'll be speaking with Don Mallard, a partner with KPMG and the U.S. leader of KPMG's Financial Management Advisory Group, about corporate cost-cutting strategies. Until then, this is Robert Barnwell in CFO Talk Radio, wishing you all the best.
We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and found the material of value. To download a transcript of this episode, receive a free subscription to the show, or to learn more about this subject, we encourage you to visit Professor Barnwell's website at robertgbarnwell.com to explore the many executive briefings, presentations, case studies, and other resources available for immediate download. This has been a production of Robert G. Barnwell. All rights reserved.